Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Jeff. Today, I want to talk about how I failed for nearly 3+ years to land my first software engineering job. I took multiple approaches. During that time, I tried the self-taught, I did a boot camp, and all kinds of things in between. I realized that this will be a good topic to talk about because although, like many of you, I've seen a lot of those videos, and that's actually how I got started it, right? Is when I first started doing my research on software engineering way back then, I saw the topics of breaking into the industry within 3 months, 6 months, that kind of thing, by either self-taught or boot camp or whatever it may be. Unfortunately for myself, that just wasn't the case. That just wasn't the case for me. And I think I took a much longer route to be able to accomplish that ultimate end goal of landing that job. And as I've been in the industry for quite some time now, the number one thing that I noticed is that my story isn't uncommon. I figured that it'd be nice to be able to share another side of the coin and just to be able to share an outcome, and also because it was a long journey and I think that got a lot out of it. And to be honest, those 3 years were some of the most challenging, difficult times of my life that I learned an incredible amount from, and I just want to be able to share some of the outcomes and strategies that I ultimately look back on that I feel like I learned. To start things off, this story actually starts off junior year of college. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know I got really bad grades, grew up lower income, and just didn't have any mentorship, had no strategy, but I always was good at math, doing engineering type stuff. I was always into cars and just building, right? And junior year, I discovered iOS development and I fell into it instantly. I saw everything was on the palm of our hands, and I felt like that's something I really wanted to do, was to be able to build mobile apps. And so I started my journey really late into college, and I tried. I bought a little Mac Mini at the time. Even now, right, to do the majority of iOS development, you need a Mac. And so I bought a Mac Mini, and the learning curve was just incredibly hard because I had no idea how to code. And so after doing more research, I learned about JavaScript and doing React Native. And that's kind of where I realized that, oh, I should actually learn a more fundamental language and more widely used language in the first place. And when I figured that out, learning JavaScript, HTML, CSS had a lot more of a foundational course setup than iOS, in my opinion. And that's kind of where my path kind of shifted at that time. I figured that I can always go back to iOS. Fast forward about a year or so, I graduated school. I try to get data jobs, that kind of stuff, anything that can get me in the door in programming. And of course, completely fell on my face because I went to like a middle tier school, 1.0 GPA, nowhere close. I ended up actually taking a construction job because I was unable to get a job out of college, basically. So my idea there was basically to self-teach myself, and that's kind of where like the self-taught era officially begins while I'm working my construction job. I'm at my construction job, regular 9 to 5, and I would go after work, put in probably 3 to 4 hours each day, and go through Coursera, Udemy, and try to get those like certifications, certificates, self-pasted courses. And after about a year of that, I kind of had mixed feelings, right? On one end, I felt stronger as a programmer, and I tried to apply to some jobs at that time. I try to apply to like very foundational web dev, I don't know, WordPress, anything that I can just get my foot into the door type jobs. And again, felt flat on my face. And I almost felt like a lot of those certifications and those quick courses just didn't amount to much. And of course, looking back now, I remember my resume at the time to apply to those jobs were just all online courses. And the resume, all the projects of those online courses definitely did not work out for me at all. And, I've already been into my construction job about a year now, and I felt this urge that if I continue to go at this path, each and every year that went by, the difficulty of just being breaking out of this and just being stuck in this loop of doing construction just felt like it was like absorbing me. So I made a really hard active decision at the time that I would commit the money to do a boot camp. The boot camp at the time was 20,000, somewhere around there, and that was a lot of money for me. That was probably my entire half my salary, if not more, during that time period. And of course, I tried to interview for the boot camp, right? I've already self-taught myself for about a year and failed. Didn't get anywhere with that. From there, I tried to apply for the boot camps and actually failed 3 times to be able to get in. And looking back, right, and thinking back at that time, I think that was actually a blessing in disguise because for the first time ever, I had something that I can directly measure some of my skills towards and where I kind of stood. And that's kind of the measurement there, was that I spent a year trying to do self-taught, and I realized that I didn't have any good strategies, plans, and especially after doing some of the beginner stuff, trying to take it to the next step, I just didn't have a good strategy. And so personally for myself, I knew I needed some sort of formal education or something like that to be able to do it. And when I did the boot camp and failed the first two times, that was a really clear sign of my my learning for self-taught was just way too slow. And I think that reality check of that I needed to learn way more to be able to land a job than I originally thought. Luckily for me at that time, I discovered that there's prep courses to get into the boot camp, and so I took those. And throughout this probably about 8 month processes of or so of studying to get into the boot camp, failing multiple times, I finally got in. And I got in, and I was actually the very last person to be able to get into the cohort that I got into. Man, I was so excited, right? I mean, this was 2 years in of just being a person that doing side work, working a full-time job, and I feel like this was kind of like a little bit of a tipping point for myself. Next thing that happened there, before you can actually even do the boot camp, you actually have to do some prep work. And so when you do the prep work, usually folks get in 3 months before or so, but I only had 2 weeks to do it. So, and then I spent like 100 hours a week trying to finish the prep work as quickly as possible because that needed to be done before I could join my cohort for day one. I was able to accomplish that, and that was the point that I was officially jobless, essentially fully committed to doing the boot camp. When I did the boot camp, right, it was challenging. As you can tell, someone that failed 3 times just to get in, I would think that personally, I felt like I was near the bottom, if not, one of the worst in my class. And one of my classmates, even that was kind of a little bit more blunt, even told me that she thought I was near the bottom, maybe in the middle on my best day in terms of programming skills. And a lot of the projects, you have to find partners, and folks get to pick who they want to work with. And maybe I was a nice person and folks wanted to work with me for that reason. But in terms of technical skills, I think that I wasn't someone that anybody in the class would aspire to work with. So there was that. Okay, so towards the end of the course, we started doing resume building, and very quickly I noticed that they were giving out templates and of how to build your resume. And I noticed that every single person's resume was exactly the same. And I did some quick math in my head. I remember thinking about this and thinking about my cohort plus the 5 other sessions that are going on. Now multiply that out by the 10 most popular boot camps. And I thought about it. There was probably thousands of folks and folks that haven't gotten a job that finished before me. There's thousands of folks out there with the exact same resume as I did. Also, along with that, knowing that I was at the very bottom of my class or near the bottom, I basically made a really active decision that after the boot camp ended, when I got that certificate, that wasn't going to be my learning, the end of my learning experience, and I was going to continue to push myself to make up for gaps, that kind of thing. And looking back, that was one of the best decisions that I ever made for myself. So the boot camp ended. Luckily, I made some really great friends during the boot camp, and every single day for months on end until we all found jobs, we would have our study job application plan, build out side projects, continue to learn how to do the things that we missed in the boot camp, and we kept on pushing ourselves. And so day in and day out, we would meet up, do 8-10 hour days, have lunch together, do algorithms from the very beginning, like literally the leak code easies for all the topics. Then we would apply to anywhere from 40 to 50 jobs a day without say, take the interviews that we personally could get. Luckily for me, one of my friends was really into some of the events and recommended that we do a hackathon. And so we ended up doing a hackathon, and we actually won the hackathon, which was nothing to brag of. Like, it sounds amazing, but nothing to brag about. It was like a high school hackathon with some college kids, I would say younger folks, and we're all grown adults. I had someone that was one of my good friends was like in his 30s already at that time, and we ended up winning the hackathon. And my resume throughout that time kept on evolving as I kept on going through that process of getting a job. At the end there, right, it took me about 5 months to get a job. I applied to thousands of jobs. Only got about 30 to 40 hits. If you do the math, it was probably about 1% of return calls. One amazing tip that I got throughout that time that really opened up my process was someone told me once that you should just apply for any job that you think you can do. Don't think about the titles and just click apply if you think you can do it. And that's what I did. And from there, I noticed that entry level jobs would get 1,000 applications within one day of it going up onto the job board. But third, fourth, fifth tier companies, their senior and mid level jobs would get 5 apps in a week. And those were the ones I was aiming for. And ultimately, that's kind of where I landed at, in hopes that they'll level me down if they liked me enough, and just being willing to take the jobs that nobody wanted to get, right? And so, yeah, that's overall essentially what happened. To sum this up, right? Probably about a year and a half of self studying, failing at that, recognizing that I just needed to know more. Couldn't get into the boot camp, so more self studying with some prep courses for about a year, just under a year. Then, of course, doing the boot camp, which took about, including the entry courses, and then also getting in, that kind of thing, another 4 months, 5 months or so, and then took me about half a year to sign that first offer letter, and I only got one offer letter at the end of all that. All right, to close this out, I think I have a couple really good points that I wanted to point out, and a couple tips that I wanted to share that I learned throughout this process. But first, I want to be able to acknowledge and talk about the reality that, doing a boot camp, doing the CS degree, especially doing self-taught, there are chances that you're not going to land a job right away, or there is opportunity that it might not happen. I think that's a real fact, and it's mainly because our career and our profession isn't one of those that there's like automatic job placement, that kind of thing, right? But I think that's okay, and I hope that doesn't discourage anybody out there. If you're extremely passionate about this, I do want to say that, me personally, I still think that there's great opportunity to break into the industry, and there's still great jobs to be had. And this is the risk to reward factor of programming is still huge, and this is still a personally great space to be in, but it's not an easy space to break into, right? And the things that, the couple tips that I have here to close things off, that I want you to think about is that although there are folks that don't get it, I think there are consistent patterns that folks that are successful and that I've seen all carry. The first thing is that there's a weird thing, right? It's like companies want you to be able to have validation from the outside world before they give you a job. They don't want to be the first person to be able to take that risk on you, and they need validation from the outside world that you can do it. So for us, and for me personally, I think that it was an incredible, valuable skill to be able to get experience that mimic the real world experience, or as close to the as real world experience as you possibly can. And that doesn't necessarily mean having a job to do so, right? If you can't get it, like, of course, tier one of that is like getting an internship, that kind of thing. But if you aren't able to get those things, what really helps set folks apart is doing what you can, right? Building those side projects and running them like they are real world projects, or letting them out into the public, even if they don't get any traction. And then, of course, like for myself, doing hackathons, joining events that showcase your skills to the greater public. I also have friends that have pretty great success that contributed to like GitHub repos, GitHub communities, that kind of thing. And of course, this sounds counterintuitive, but I think that this changes the narrative of how you talk about your resume and how you communicate yourself out, right? You then talk about it in a way, instead of being an educational level, you can talk about the deadlines and the pressure and that kind of stuff that mimics the real world experience a lot more when you approach it in that sort of manner. The number two thing that I realize here is that, and being in the industry for quite some time now, there's no escape in the learning curve of programming and continuing to teach yourself and getting better at programming itself. I wouldn't let the CS degree, especially in these stages of your CS degree, your boot camp, being self-taught, getting that certificate, getting that diploma, be the last chapter of the learning curve. It's very important that you're able to continue to learn and challenge yourself. Just keep on pushing yourself as you go through that process before you get that job. Because when you do that, it leads into number one, right? At the point of getting those big milestone diploma certifications, you should be able to contribute back to the open source, back to the market, and although you might not be doing it for a job or a company, again, right? Your next projects, your next contributions shouldn't be websites for yourself. They should be like, bigger contributions, leveraging the skills that you have. And I think that you'll naturally find those spaces if you continue to learn and continue to find interest and have curiosity in what you're trying to do. I hope that helps. I hope that story at least was interesting. And if I look back on this process, as long as it was, essentially, if you added in some extracurriculars, some electives, I think this process took me as long as school, going back to school. But ultimately, I wasn't able to get a software job within 3 to 6 months. But the learning experience was amazing, and the risk for me versus the reward has been huge. And those years were well spent doing this, because at the end I realized that it is something that I was incredibly passionate about, and I loved a lot, and I really wanted to do. And so that's kind of where I want to leave this at. Yeah, you might not be exactly where you're at now, but just remember that this is a smaller picture in the larger grand scheme of things, right? It might take you a while, it might take you time, the market might be a little bit more difficult. But if you really want this to happen, these moments right here are going to be rewarding, and there'll be moments you look back to and realize that they were just small parts of the larger time frame, right? I hope that helps. If you want me to break down any of the parts of the video or break down any of the smaller topics, I'd love to do so. If not, I'll talk to you on the next one. Later.